He thought it was just another abandoned ruin. A perfect photo opportunity. But what Ethan Blake didn't know was that beneath the soil he stood on, hundreds had vanished without a trace. Locals wouldn't speak of it. Government agents tried to erase it. And what he found buried there was never supposed to be uncovered. What happens when a tourist uncovers something so horrifying? Even history tries to bury it. Ethan Blake stepped off the minibus onto the parched, uneven earth of southeastern Turkey, his hiking boots crunching against scattered gravel as the dust kicked up around him like ghostly wisps. He adjusted his canvas backpack and looked up at the unforgiving afternoon sun, beads of sweat forming on his brow beneath his wide-brimmed hat. This wasn't the kind of tourist haven most travelers wrote home about, and that's exactly why he chose it. With a successful travel blog known for uncovering hidden gems far from polished tourist routes, Ethan's niche had evolved from scenic hikes and unknown street food to off-limits ruins and haunted battlefields. This time, he wanted something visceral, something buried under time and silence. A rumor he'd overheard in a hostel in Istanbul led him to the dusty town of Karanlıkdere, a place so obscure it barely existed on modern GPS. It was perfect. The village was quiet, unsettlingly so. A row of slanted homes lined the main street, their plaster flaking like dead skin. Rusted satellite dishes clung desperately to rooftops. A few goats grazed aimlessly near a collapsed stone wall. The few locals Ethan passed barely looked at him. Those who did held his gaze a moment too long, as if evaluating whether he was ignorant or simply suicidal. He brushed it off. People always act weird when they know they're sitting on a secret, he told himself. Ethan checked into the only guest house in town, a creaky structure with lace curtains and a landlady who spoke only in grunts and gestures. After dropping his bag, he walked to a dusty convenience store run by a young boy with sharp eyes who eyed Ethan's DSLR camera like it was a weapon. Later that evening, Ethan pulled out the hand-drawn map he'd copied from a forum dedicated to forbidden travel. A small X marked a location near the edge of the town's outskirts, a shaded section beside the remnants of an old Roman-era road. There were no coordinates, no landmark names. Just the ominous instruction, walk east until the birds stop singing. It was vague, and possibly a hoax, but that was half the thrill. As night fell, Ethan charged his camera batteries, double-checked his SD cards, and planned his route. He was determined to head out at sunrise. He ignored the twitchy glance from the innkeeper when she saw the map. He missed the murmured prayers of a woman sweeping outside his window. To him, all these things were color, atmosphere for a story that would make his blog go viral. What he didn't realize was that the people of Karanlıkdere didn't think his curiosity was romantic. They thought it was suicidal. Morning came with the buzz of insects and the occasional bark of a dog. Ethan packed a bottle of water, a snack, and his camera gear. As he made his way past the last of the homes and into the brush, he noted that the air felt unnaturally still. There were no bird calls. Not even the rustle of wind through the sparse shrubs. The instructions had been chillingly accurate. The silence grew heavier with every step, pressing against his eardrums like rising altitude. Just as he began to wonder if he was lost, he crested a ridge and saw it, a partial stone arch buried in ivy, jagged columns collapsed like broken teeth, and a dark, yawning cavity where a doorway had once been. It didn't look Roman, Greek, or Ottoman. It looked older, cruder. A ruin too old to have a name and too ominous to belong to history. Ethan's heart raced, not with fear, but triumph. He had found it. He hurried toward the ruin, brushing aside vines and thorns as if they were mere cobwebs in the way of glory. He stood before the arch, framed perfectly by the rising sun behind him. Without hesitation, he flipped his camera around, extended his arm, and took a selfie. He smiled wide, the stone arch just over his shoulder, the dry earth at his feet barely disturbed. In the photo, he looked victorious. It would be the image to launch his next viral post. But when he looked at the photo again, something was off. There was a pale, vertical smear in the background, barely visible, like a figure fading into the shadows of the ruin. He squinted, dismissed it as lens flare, and stuffed the camera into his bag. He spent another hour circling the structure, jotting notes, taking wide shots, poking into recesses that reeked of dampness despite the arid climate. A faint metallic scent clung to the stone, rusty, almost bloody, But Ethan chalked it up to iron-rich soil. The walls bore no inscriptions. No artwork. Only crude hand-sized indentations and occasional deep grooves that looked eerily like claw marks. One alcove, partially collapsed, was filled with dried leaves and something else, he couldn't tell what. A glint of metal, maybe. He reached for it but stopped short when he heard a soft, distant thud. Like a footstep. Followed by silence. He stood still, straining his ears. Nothing. Not even wind. He called out, but his voice came back to him as if swallowed by stone. Suddenly uneasy, he decided he had enough material for one day. He turned back toward the village, camera in hand, and left the ruin behind, never realizing that something had just started to notice him too. Back at the guest house, Ethan eagerly transferred the photos from his camera to his laptop, eyes wide with the thrill of what he believed to be a major discovery. Each image loaded slowly due to the old processor, but that only heightened his anticipation. The lighting was perfect, the golden hue of sunrise cascading through the crumbled pillars, casting long shadows across the ground. He studied each frame like a curator examining a priceless artifact. When he finally opened the selfie he had taken in front of the arch, his heart skipped. That faint smear he had noticed earlier wasn't a trick of the light. Zooming in, he saw what looked like a human figure. Tall, slightly hunched, with limbs just disproportionate enough to look wrong. The face was obscured in blur, but the outline was unmistakably humanoid. He ran the photo through an exposure filter. The contrast revealed two bright dots where eyes should be. They were staring directly at the camera. At him. For a moment, a chill traced his spine. Then his rational side took over. It had to be a smudge, a lens reflection, or even pareidolia, how the brain sees faces in random patterns. Still, he cropped that part of the photo out before uploading it to his blog. The post went live under the title Turkey's Lost Ruin, a place so hidden it barely exists, and within hours, it began to gain traction. Comments poured in. Most praised his courage. Others asked for directions. But a few were different. A user named Siren_Karanlik wrote in Turkish, "You should not have gone there. We buried it for a reason." Another said simply, "Look beneath your feet." Ethan brushed them off as internet trolls or cryptic thrill seekers. But one comment stopped him cold. A profile with no avatar and a numeric username wrote, "This place was closed in 1983 after they found the bones. They said it was an accident. They lied." He reread it 3 times. The timestamp showed it had been posted seconds after the photo went live. He tried to respond, but the profile vanished. Page not found. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, at least not fear he'd admit, but because he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been off about that ruin. He replayed the sounds in his head, the silence, the soft thud, the lack of birds. The way the air had felt denser, heavier. He recalled a strange vibration beneath his boots when he stood near the central arch. Like the ground itself had a pulse. He chalked it up to overthinking and opened the window for some fresh air. The streets below were deserted, cloaked in a fog that hadn't been there before. He thought he saw someone standing near the edge of the road, staring up. But when he looked again, it was gone. The next morning, Ethan visited the village cafe, hoping to talk to someone, anyone, about the site. He approached a middle-aged man sipping tea and asked, in broken Turkish, if he knew anything about the ruin east of town. The man froze mid-sip, eyes locking on Ethan's with immediate tension. Without a word, he stood up and left. Ethan tried again with a younger woman working the counter, showing her a photo of the arch. Her expression shifted instantly from polite interest to alarm. She whispered something under her breath and pointed to an old man seated near the window. His face was deeply lined, his beard yellowed with time and tobacco, but his eyes were piercing. Ethan approached cautiously, introduced himself, and held out the photo. The man didn't take it. He just looked at it. Then looked at Ethan. Then, in slow, deliberate English, he said, "That place, it eats memory. We do not speak of it." Ethan pressed him for more, claiming he was a journalist, a researcher. The man shook his head. They found bodies there. So many. Children. Women. No names. No records. The government closed the area. They built over it once. Then nature tore it down again. Ethan asked when this happened. The man replied, "Before I was born. But my father remembered. He helped cover the pit." Ethan felt his stomach knot. Pit. Not grave. Not cemetery. Pit. He asked why no one had warned him. The man's gaze darkened. "You were warned. The silence warned you. The animals warned you. But you smiled in front of it." Back in his room, Ethan stared at the photo again. This time, he didn't focus on the ruin. He focused on the earth beneath his feet, the darkened patches in the soil, the uneven texture, the way the grass around the structure didn't grow upright but lay flat and sickly. He pulled up older satellite images of the region. The ruin didn't appear on any of them. But in the oldest photo he could find, taken during a 1972 geological survey, the area showed a large rectangular excavation zone marked with caution lines. The next year's photo showed nothing but bare land. Every image afterward showed the slow growth of brush, but the structure had never been marked. It had simply reappeared. That night, he set an alarm for 5 a.m. He had to go back. Not for more photos. For answers. Before the sun had even burned away the early morning haze, Ethan was already on the move, clutching his gear with fingers that felt stiffer than usual, his breath slightly fogging in the strange, cool air that seemed to cling to the edge of the village. He passed shuttered windows and tightly closed doors, the kind that didn't just keep out weather, but stories. As he approached the outskirts, something unusual caught his eye, a small bundle of fabric tied around a cluster of dried branches near the well. Curious, he paused. The fabric looked old, stained at its corners, with symbols stitched into it using what looked like black thread, or possibly hair. A charm, maybe. A warning. He took a photo of it and walked on, pretending he hadn't noticed the curtain twitch in the house across the road. As Ethan made his way through the overgrowth toward the ruin once more, his phone vibrated. A text message from an unrecognized number blinked on the screen. "Don't go back. You were not meant to see it once, and never twice." No sender. No country code. No way to trace it. He looked up toward the stone arch in the distance, its silhouette now half swallowed in morning fog. The silence returned like a blanket over the landscape. Not even insects dared hum. He reached the ruin's edge and crouched low, placing a hand against the stone wall. The surface was cold, unnaturally so, and the metallic scent had grown stronger. He started taking fresh photos, framing the doorway, the grooves in the stone, the way the earth near the center of the ruin formed an almost imperceptible depression, like a slow inhale from something buried. Just as he began adjusting the camera settings for a close-up shot of the wall scratches, he heard a sudden voice behind him. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan spun around, heart hammering. Standing a few feet away was the old man from the cafe, the one who had spoken of pits and silence. He stood now with both hands gripping a wooden walking stick, his eyes no less sharp. Ethan blinked. "How did you follow me?" The old man didn't answer the question. Instead, he looked past Ethan to the ruin. "They lied to us, you know. They told us it was a plague. That the land was cursed by disease. They made us believe it was a mercy, that what we did was necessary." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "What did you do?" The man looked at him for a long moment, then walked past him into the ruin's shadow, pointing to the ground. "My father helped dig. They didn't bury people here. They threw them." Ethan stared at the depression in the ground. "How many?" he asked, barely above a whisper. The old man answered without emotion. "At least 100. Maybe more. No names. No prayers. Just dirt and silence." He gestured toward the camera. "That device of yours, it won't help you. You think truth is enough to stop what's down there." Ethan felt a mixture of fear and anger rise in his chest. So everyone just let it happen. No justice. No trial. The old man's voice dropped. This wasn't a crime by one man. This was a silence enforced by generations. Some of us tried to speak. They disappeared too. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Ethan unfolded it and found a black and white photo, a grainy image of the same ruin, but taken decades ago. In it, 4 figures stood near the center. 3 were in military uniforms. The 4th was a woman, barefoot, her head bowed. The caption scribbled at the bottom said, May 1982, final shipment. The man turned to leave. Don't trust anyone who tells you to forget. The ground remembers, even if we don't. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone, vanishing down a barely visible footpath into the brush. Ethan stood in place, too stunned to follow. The photo trembled in his hand. He knew what he had to do. He had to go back, dig deeper, literally, and uncover proof. A name, a relic, something irrefutable. That evening, back at the guest house, Ethan backed up every photo onto 3 separate drives. He scanned the old photograph and posted it to a private online forum for verification. He didn't mention the name of the village or the location, just asked if anyone recognized the uniforms. Responses came slowly. Most were dismissive. But one stood out. A user named Shadowed Truth replied, Photo is military. Late Cold War. Turkish Internal Security. Unit disbanded in 1984. Official reason, operational deviation. Unofficial reason, massacre. The message ended with coordinates, very close to where Ethan had stood that morning. Before he could reply, a knock came at his door. He looked through the peephole and saw no one. When he opened it, only a note remained, folded once and left on the floor. It read, They know you went back. They always know. He shut the door and locked it, heart racing. He checked his blog, still up. But the comments had changed. Dozens now read the same thing. Stop digging. He tried to refresh, but the page crashed. When he reopened it, the post was gone. Every trace of the ruin, the photo, even his old articles, wiped. Panic crept into his chest. Someone was watching. Someone didn't want this known. But it was too late. Ethan had already seen too much. At dawn, the sky hung low over Karanlıkdere, thick with sallow clouds that cast a jaundiced pallor across the crumbling rooftops. Ethan moved quickly and quietly, not wanting to be seen. He carried only what he needed, his camera, a flashlight, a crowbar, gloves, a foldable shovel, and a single USB stick on which he had saved copies of the photos and the black and white image the old man had given him. Paranoia had started to weave itself around every shadow. The previous night, he'd awoken twice to hear what he swore were footsteps just outside his window, though every time he looked, no one was there. His blog had been inexplicably restored by morning, but the comments section was now disabled. Ethan didn't believe in coincidences anymore. Something, or someone, was monitoring his every move. And yet, he was more compelled than ever to return. Something was buried beneath that ruin, something nobody wanted uncovered, and he was going to find it. The approach to the ruin felt longer this time, the silence denser, as if even sound had learned to avoid this place. The tall grasses bowed away from his legs without wind, and when he passed the cluster of thorn bushes near the outer perimeter, he noticed that they had been recently cut, clean and purposeful, their sap still weeping at the edges. Someone else had been here. Possibly very recently. He crouched near the shallow depression in the center of the stone floor, laid down his pack, and pulled on his gloves. He inserted the crowbar into the cracks between 2 stones and applied pressure. The first slab groaned as it shifted, revealing thick, matted soil beneath. It smelled of wet copper and decay. With the shovel, he scraped away layer after layer of compacted dirt, each inch a deeper plunge into something ancient and unspeakable. It didn't take long. 6 inches down, the blade of his shovel hit something solid. He knelt, brushing away the grime with his bare hands. A bone. Thick. Femur-sized. Human. Panic surged through his chest, but he forced it back down. He dug further, and soon more shapes began to emerge. Fragments of a skull with teeth still intact, a tangle of rib bones collapsed into one another, a rusted bracelet wrapped tightly around a skeletal wrist. He gagged but kept going. After unearthing what appeared to be 4 partial skeletons in a single quadrant of the ruin, Ethan stepped back, unable to breathe. He turned on his camera and began recording, narrating what he had found with trembling precision. Then, something odd caught his eye. Half buried beside a dislodged stone was a rectangular object, wrapped in mold-stained fabric. He tugged it free and realized it was a notebook, water-damaged, pages warped, but still legible in parts. The cover was cracked leather, embossed with a crescent symbol he didn't recognize. Inside, the first few pages were names. Dozens of them. Next to each, a number and a short Turkish phrase. He used a translation app on his phone to decode a few. Delivered. No identification. Did not scream. One name had a red X through it, followed by the word, survived. A sharp chill climbed up Ethan's spine. Further into the notebook were sketches, maps, floor plans, crude outlines of what looked like tunnels beneath the ruin. One passage stood out, the handwriting erratic and barely legible. They come at night. They don't rot like normal bodies. The ground feeds them, keeps them warm. I heard breathing when the pit was full. Ethan's hand trembled as he turned the page. The last entry was a single line. I lied. One of them was still alive. Suddenly, a noise shattered the stillness. Not wind. Not an animal. A voice. A whisper from behind the stone arch. Ethan spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the air, but he saw no one. He grabbed his camera and began packing everything with frantic urgency. But just as he reached for the notebook again, the ground beneath him shifted. A loud crack echoed through the ruin, and one of the stones gave way. Ethan fell hard, sliding partway into a hole that hadn't been there before. His flashlight tumbled, its beam now illuminating a hollow chamber below the surface. What it revealed was worse than anything he had prepared for. Rows of bones. Not scattered, but arranged. Arms crossed over chests. Heads facing inward. Ritualistic. Deliberate. At the center of the chamber, barely visible in the flickering light, was a mass that didn't match the others. Not bone. Flesh. Preserved. Skin stretched tight over a figure curled in a fetal position. Eyes closed but lips slightly parted as if mid-scream. Ethan scrambled backward, tearing his jacket on the stone as he pulled himself out. He didn't look back into the hole. He grabbed the notebook, stuffed it into his bag, and ran. As he fled through the brush, branches clawed at his skin, roots tried to trip him, and once, only once, he thought he heard a low moan echo from the direction of the ruin. Back in his room, Ethan sealed the notebook in a plastic bag, copied every photo again, and sent them to a journalist friend he trusted in London, using an encrypted link. He added a note, "If anything happens to me, publish this. The world needs to know." Then he locked his door, turned out the lights, and sat in silence, staring at the photo of the corpse with the lips parted in agony. He didn't sleep that night. And for the first time since arriving, he wondered if the old man was wrong, if silence hadn't been the crime, but the protection. By the time the sun rose again over the village, Ethan was already gone. He had left Caranldeer under the cloak of darkness, boarding the earliest bus he could find that would take him out of the region. He said nothing to the innkeeper, avoided the cafe, and kept his head down as the bus rumbled away from the place where silence was enforced by fear and truth was buried under layers of stone. The road twisted through the mountains like a serpent, each mile adding distance between him and the ruin, but not from what he had seen. The images were seared into his brain, the meticulously arranged bones, the strangely preserved body, and the words in that notebook, especially the phrase. One of them was still alive. In Istanbul, he checked into a chain hotel under a different name and immediately contacted the British consulate. He claimed to be a journalist in possession of evidence related to a Cold War atrocity. They told him to wait. While he waited, Ethan sent encrypted copies of the notebook scans and site photos to multiple outlets, including one in the US that specialized in government cover-ups and another in Germany with ties to war crime investigations. He received no replies. Not even delivery confirmations. He tried contacting his journalist friend in London again. Her email bounced. Her social media accounts were suddenly blank, scrubbed. Panic surged in his chest as he opened his blog. Once again, everything was gone. This time, not just his latest post, his entire archive. Years of content, wiped clean. When he checked his backup server, it too had been corrupted. He tried accessing the drive from his second laptop, but it wouldn't boot. The notebook remained sealed in his backpack, untouched, but now it felt radioactive, like holding it too long might unravel everything around him. 2 days later, a man knocked on his hotel door. He was tall, clean-shaven, dressed in a government-issued suit with no identification. He introduced himself in English as Mr. Yilmaz from the Ministry of Culture. Ethan immediately asked how he had found him. Yilmaz smiled without warmth. "We know who you are, Mr. Blake. And we know where you've been." He asked to come in. Ethan refused. Yilmaz didn't insist. Instead, he handed over a folder and said, "If you want answers, read this. But I suggest you leave the country immediately." Then he walked away. Ethan bolted the door and opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside was a thin stack of photocopied documents, official memos from 1982 and 1983, all stamped grisly, classified. They described the relocation of unnamed civilians to a temporary internment site outside Karanlıkdere. Another memo detailed the sudden reassignment of a military unit following an incident of psychological contamination. One report simply read, "Subject 47 exhibited behaviors inconsistent with known trauma responses. Site sealed indefinitely. Recommend permanent suppression." None of the documents bore signatures. All names were redacted. Ethan stared at the pages, rage boiling in his chest. These were admissions, half-redacted, heavily filtered admissions, but proof nonetheless. Proof that something had happened out there. That the ruin hadn't always been a ruin. It had been a site. A facility. And whatever had happened there had terrified the people who ran it enough to bury it twice, once under stone and again under silence. He took photos of the documents, scanned them, and sent them to a secure folder he had set up years ago in case of emergencies. Then he called a Turkish reporter he had met once at a journalism conference, a woman named Elif who specialized in uncovering lost histories. She answered on the third ring, groggy and suspicious. When Ethan explained what he had found, she paused, then said in a low voice, "If what you're saying is true, they won't just silence your blog. They'll silence you." Before he could ask what she meant, she hung up. An hour later, her number was disconnected. That night, Ethan moved to a cheaper hotel farther from the tourist zones. There, he opened the notebook again, trying to decipher more of the symbols. One set of markings at the end of the final page caught his attention, a sequence of numbers and letters, written in a different hand than the rest. He cross-referenced them with the documents Yilmaz had given him and realized they matched a file number. Using a VPN, Ethan accessed a Turkish government database that had been partially leaked during an earlier scandal. The file was still there, misfiled under agricultural policy. He downloaded everything. Inside were transcripts of recorded interviews with soldiers who had allegedly been stationed near the site. The recordings were from 1983, but the language was chillingly familiar. One soldier described voices at night, echoing up through the stone, sometimes whispering in languages no one could understand. Another said they heard laughter coming from the pit long after it had been filled. A third, identified only as Sergeant K, claimed that after the final night of the operation, 4 of his men vanished without a trace, their tents left behind, gear untouched. When asked if he believed the prisoners had escaped, he replied, "It wasn't them. It was what was left of them. They moved wrong. They didn't cast shadows. They didn't blink." Ethan stared at the screen, nauseated. Every detail confirmed the impossible, that the site hadn't just been the scene of a massacre, it had become something else. Something alive. Something still breathing beneath the earth. The next morning, Ethan went to the British consulate in person. At the entrance, a guard scanned his passport and frowned. "Sir, your travel record shows a temporary restriction from reentry. Your file has been flagged." Ethan's blood ran cold. Flagged by who? The guard just shook his head. He wasn't allowed in. Not as a tourist. Not as a citizen. Not anymore. As Ethan stepped away from the gate, he noticed a black car parked across the street. 2 men inside. One lifted a phone. Ethan didn't wait to see who it was for. He vanished into the crowd, heart pounding, trying to suppress the realization now pressing into his chest like a lead weight. He wasn't just being watched. He was being erased. Ethan Blake changed his SIM cards, closed all his social media accounts, and paid cash for a one-way ticket out of Turkey using a forged passport acquired from a man whose name he never learned and whose face he tried to forget. The airport security line felt like a death march. Every beep of a scanner, every glance from a guard, every delay at the gate prickled the skin on his neck with dread. But somehow, they let him through. No one stopped him. No one called his name. And just like that, he was airborne, above the very land that had tried to swallow him whole. The flight to New York was long, but sleep never came. He kept replaying the voices in those transcripts, the image of the corpse with parted lips, the soldier's words. They didn't cast shadows. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't thinking about blog metrics, followers, or the next great adventure. He was thinking about silence, how deeply it could be enforced, and how deafening it became once broken. Back in the US, he checked into a cheap motel under another false name, triple-locked the door, and covered the windows with towels. The notebook was now stored inside a lead-lined fireproof safe he carried with him everywhere. He no longer used the internet unless it was through a VPN on a borrowed laptop in public libraries miles from where he slept. He reached out to contacts he hadn't spoken to in years, editors, freelance whistleblowers, documentarians. One by one, they either refused to get involved or vanished mid-conversation. His friend Julia, a photojournalist known for publishing war zone stories, answered a single encrypted message and told him to stop. Ethan, this is bigger than a massacre. This is ritual. Industrialized ritual. You've seen too much. If you don't want to disappear, burn it all and never speak of it again. Then she blocked him. Her name was erased from his contact list the next time he checked. It was as if she had never existed. He started noticing things. A man who appeared behind him in two different cafes 50 miles apart. A van with no plates parked outside his building 3 nights in a row. A child's drawing taped to a light post near his motel, showing a dark hole, stick figures with excess over their eyes, and one figure still standing, red lines scribbled around its feet. He snapped a photo and returned to his room, where he found the towels over the windows slightly disturbed. Nothing stolen, but everything was touched, repositioned. His toothbrush was dry but in the wrong slot. A single smear on the bathroom mirror read, "We know." He left that night, hitchhiking to another state and checking into a cabin deep in the woods. There was no electricity, no cell signal. He needed to think. But even the isolation offered no peace. The ruin followed him in dreams, visions of twisted bones, eyes blinking open from within the pit, and a voice that asked the same question every time. Why did you look? Desperate, Ethan tried publishing the story anonymously on a whistleblower site. The file uploaded successfully, but when he checked the site the next morning, the page redirected to a 404 error. The archive had vanished. A few hours later, his fireproof safe was gone, stolen from a locked room. No sign of forced entry. No broken locks. Just absence, like something had never existed. In the corner of the room where it once stood, someone, or something, had left a single Polaroid photo. It showed him at the ruin. Not from the angle of his selfie, but from above, as if someone, or some unseen eye, had watched him the entire time. His breath caught. His eyes in the photo were wide, staring up. But he had no memory of looking up. That meant someone else had been there. Or something. Weeks passed. He became a ghost of himself. Paranoid, unshaven, thinner by the day. And then, just as he was preparing to flee again, he received a letter. No address. No stamp. Just a plain envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in the same erratic script as the final pages of the notebook. You were never meant to leave. The ground remembers. And it has roots. Beneath the message, a symbol was drawn in ink. The same crescent from the notebook cover, but this time, the crescent was cracked, bleeding lines trailing downward. Ethan stared at it until the ink blurred. With nowhere else to turn, he tried going public. He booked an appearance on an obscure internet podcast known for conspiracy theories. The host welcomed him with enthusiasm, until Ethan started sharing details about the ruin. Then the call dropped. The episode never aired. And the host's channel was removed within 24 hours. All that remained was a cryptic video the host had posted hours before the interview. a black screen with static, and a distorted voice whispering, "The earth swallows what truth reveals." Ethan finally understood. This wasn't about exposing history. It wasn't about mass graves or military cover-ups. It was about something older, darker, something primal that humanity had once known and deliberately forgotten. The ruin wasn't just a burial site. It was a door. A wound in the land that someone tried to suture with stone, with silence, with erasure. But Ethan had ripped the stitches open. And now, the wound wanted him back. His health began to fail. Night sweats drenched his sheets. His gums bled. Doctors found nothing. One by one, his teeth loosened, then fell. In their place, sores formed, shaped like tiny crescents. One morning, he awoke in a field, miles from where he remembered sleeping. His hands were dirty, his clothes torn. Beneath him was fresh earth, recently disturbed. He scrambled to his feet, heart racing, only to realize he had no memory of how he got there. Later that day, a boy found him wandering a gas station parking lot, whispering nonsense about shadows without bodies and doors that bled. He was taken to a hospital, diagnosed with exhaustion. But no family came forward. No one claimed him. His name no longer appeared in any database. He was erased. Just a man with dirt under his nails, staring at the wall, whispering, "I shouldn't have looked."